We're back with another episode of Boots, Balls and Bras with myself, Fara Williams, and the amazing Anita Asante. Anita, crazy birthday week continuing from last weekend. I mean, 40s tend to drag out a little bit longer than any other year.
I tried to drag it out, but I just had like a cute little pizza party with my in-laws and extended family, and then basically drop back to reality. Yeah, it was nice to get a little birthday song when I walked into the green room on Sunday from you guys.
Yeah.
I won't mention the singing, but it was nice. The intention was good.
Intention is always good, and a nice birthday cake, right? What did she make you? Georgia made you banana cake.
Georgia made a banana, yeah, like a banana bread chocolate chip cake. It was amazing. I mean, it went down a treat.
Spoiled little thing you are. I didn't get any of that a few years back. Not that I'm holding on to it anyway. But neat. We'll start that game because obviously we were both at the Chelsea Spurs game. The game off the back of Chelsea wrapping up the title midweek when they beat Manchester United 1-0, Lucy Bond's header. So really a nothing game in terms of for Chelsea. They made 9 changes, but what they did have on the line was an invincible season that we know they're still trying to achieve. But what do you make of, we've spoken a lot about Chelsea and the players and the mentality and stuff, but what do you actually make of Sonia Bompastor's first season as Chelsea manager, taking over from Emma Hayes?
I mean, I think it's an incredible first season for Sonia Bompastor, and I think the way that Chelsea started the season really allowed them the room, if you like, to not necessarily get to the same levels as they started with and still succeed. I think in terms of winning mentality, they've always had that. What Sonia is trying to add to their winning mentality is that extra belief and confidence. And I think the right times in the season to peak, but I think that comes with experience. So now having experienced one season, in charge in the WSL, she'll probably have a better understanding when obviously competing on all fronts, how to maintain and when to, in terms of the training and everything, how to sustain the team to the levels that they need to be able to manage, especially when you go into obviously Champions League and cup competitions. But I mean, delighted for her, and I think it's an amazing achievement because that is a massive legacy that she had to fulfill when she came in, trying to fill Emma Hayes's boots, and she's done that in her first season in charge. That's outstanding.
I would agree. I think she's had a fantastic season. Of course, on paper, when you look at the squad that she inherited from Emma Hayes, of course, you're going to argue that she's probably inherited the best squad in the WSL, but you still have to manage that group. So as much as having all the best players, we've seen, in recent seasons, you can have on paper, the best squad and what looks like the most competitive, but they don't pick up trophies. So the fact that she's continued that success, actually bettered it this season. They've already won the Conti Cup. They've obviously won the league, and then they're a game away from winning the FA Cup if they do that, but also to go the whole season unbeaten, which was something that Chelsea haven't done. So I think in terms of that, I think, yes, they got knocked out of the Champions League. Yes, in a way that in a manner that we probably didn't expect. We thought they would have been a lot more competitive, and they weren't to be. But I just think the job she's done has been fantastic. The way that she's had to rotate players as well. I think trying to get that right in your first season and keep people happy is really difficult. People would argue it's not the greatest to watch at times with so many changes. You kind of lose those connections. There's been plenty of games where we've been like, the connections are just a little bit off, but they rotate quite a lot of players. It's very rarely you see a Chelsea team have the same starting 11 week to week. So she's had a lot of things to manage within that group, and I think she's done it tremendously well. And as I say, bettered the season they had last year. Okay, I know that the intentions, I know everybody wanted Chelsea to win the Champions League and the players more so than anybody else, but there's still a gap there, and we'll maybe touch on that a little bit more. But in terms of the pressure needs, because I mean, I really like listening to Sonia, and I like talking to her when we have her in alongside us after the game. I actually like how honest she is in interviews, how passionate she is, and how much of a winner she is. But in terms of the pressure coming into that Chelsea squad to take on from what Emma Hayes did over a period of time, how do you think she's dealt with that?
I think she's dealt with it really well. I mean, you know, she appears to be someone that thrives and embraces pressure. She's played at the very highest level, at club level, internationally for France. She's used to that level of expectation and pressure. She's managed the most dominant team in European competitions in terms of Lyon. So she's already felt what that's like to have it. Yeah. She probably hasn't felt what it's like to be in England and our fandom and the media and the attention that the game gets here. But I think she really is always so honest and reflective. I really have appreciated her honesty post games, pre games, in assessing and evaluating her team and her players. And I think she has a level of assuredness, and understanding that yes, they want to be the best team, and if absolutely are the best team in England, but want to be the best team in Europe. But her players are still human beings. I feel like she has that kind of empathetic, emotional kind of intelligence as well around her team, and understand. She even said, didn't she, on Sunday about the team rotation, understanding that's difficult for the players coming in, and that you don't always get to perform at your best. And I think that stuff is where she builds her trust and the relationships between herself and her players. And we found out that she doesn't drink coffee or drink, and I was like mind blown, because I was like, wait, how does this job not send you to any of those? So that in itself is impressive. So I mean, she just impresses me on so many levels, and I think she's only going to keep evolving and improving this team.
I think she embraced that pressure. She knew what it would be like. I think she learned a little bit more about how big the pressure was as the job went on a little bit. We spoke to her at the end of the game, and she said coming to England, she knew and had heard how competitive the league was. And actually, until she was in it, she didn't realize just how competitive it was. And, every game is competitive and every team wants to beat Chelsea. And I mentioned at the weekend, Chelsea, playing against Chelsea, if you're a WSL team, it's like playing an FA Cup final. They want to knock you off your pedals. You know what I mean? They want to knock you off the top. And so every game they make it difficult for you to win. Not every team's intention is to try and beat Chelsea, but to stop Chelsea from winning. Whereas I wouldn't say the same when they, come up against other teams in the league. So it has been really difficult, but I think she's embraced that really well. I think, as you speak about when she spoke about her players after the game and how proud she was, 9 changes, not easy. Connections aren't there. 1 day preparation, because obviously they were up in Manchester, weren't they, for the midweek game? And just the way the players, she said she tried something different as well. Remember, she said, they went for back 3, so something a little bit different. A lot of information. So to put that trust and obviously get a result. Yes, it was a penalty, and Ashley Neville will be kicking herself because there was no need for her to make the challenge the way she did. And once you give Chelsea a lead like that and allow them into the game when the game's against them a little bit, there's only one winner, and we all know that. But what do you make, Neat? Because obviously there's got to be some secrets to why Chelsea are so successful and why they continue to win the way that they do. But just to add before you answer that, I've been surprised a little bit. Chelsea have won 9 games this season by only a 1-goal margin, and it's the highest they've been in the last 6 years in terms of when they've won the title. Do you think that's because they've been rotating so much? Do you think because what I just mentioned before in terms of teams are trying to make it really difficult for Chelsea to get these results? Like, what do you put that down to?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I think, as you say, they've got such squad depth with unbelievable talent at the disposal. They have to try and balance playing minutes across the season because they're also competing on all fronts in all competitions. So losing, you don't always have that momentum and the fluidity of performance whilst trying to build relationships on the pitch. So it makes it more difficult, I think, to create against teams. But then I also think we have to give some credit to other teams. Teams are also trying to invest their squads. They're trying to improve. They know that they can't necessarily go toe to toe with teams like Chelsea, but they are trying to be more defensively compact and make it difficult, as you say, and be disruptive and frustrate them for longer. So Chelsea are having to sort of adapt a little bit more as well, because they're probably facing more teams that bank up against them than more teams that high press them as well. And I think we can't negate the fact that they haven't had Sam Kerr all season. You almost forget that, You know, they had, you know, the top goal scorer in the league, who is just an incredible finisher and forward, who hasn't been available all season long. And so much of their play and so much of their intention in and out of possession came through playing with Sam and the relationship with Guru. Had Guru at the start of the season, didn't have her so much the rest of the season. You know, I think Lauren James has been out intermittently as well with niggles and some injuries. These are really impactful, key creative players, score goals and create a lot, and they're not on the pitch. Whilst you're having some new signings come in, trying to adapt, trying to learn about the Chelsea way. But the one thing we can never fault, as you said, is mentality, because that is Chelsea DNA through and through. And in training, every single player is hunting for an opportunity to play. And I think that's what keeps them hungry. And that's what keeps their levels so high that they can just grind out results when they need to.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, you know, when you just mentioned Sam Kerr, then I think, you know, I think she's a forgotten player, right? Because when you don't play for a whole season, you kind of forget, actually, well, we've just gone nearly invincible, one game away from doing that. We've won a Taconic Cup already, and we're in an FA Cup final, and without our main striker. And, you know, I know we could talk about injuries at other clubs and whatever, but, you know, I guess I forgot that, you know, the length of time that Sam Kerr's been out in it for next season. I'm sure Sonia will be looking at that and be like, wow, this is like a new signing for them. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think, you know, I think a part of this, if we want to call it secret to their success, is the fact that they have a mentality that you just mentioned there. But I think in terms of characters, I think they have character because they do have setbacks. They do have challenges to overcome, and they find a way to do that. They just have this know-how, and it's really difficult. But I think when you're in those situations, you often then, you know, the more you put yourself through these situations like Chelsea have been through, you end up being comfortable finding a way to do things. And I think that's what Chelsea have become, a team that actually know they can suffer, know they can win games, whether it be a high press or with the ball, but they know how to get a result. And I think that's something that, if I was to ask you what the other teams need to do in order to compete with Chelsea outside of investing, I think they need to have find a way of winning when they can't do it with their style. I don't know what you think on that, because that's what I was going to ask. Like, what do you think other teams in WSL need to do in order to really compete? Because, you know, Chelsea won the league for the, you know, with 2 games to spare. That's not happened in the last 3 seasons. So the fact that they've done that, does it suggest that the gap's getting bigger, or does it suggest it's been a kind of up and down season for teams in and around them?
Yeah, I think for other teams, it's still trying to chase consistency of performances and results, alongside, you know, Chelsea have been breached this season on a number of occasions, or looked vulnerable defensively. So on the one hand, I think teams need to be more clinical when they get those opportunities and to punish them. But I would say other teams' focus should also be on game management, managing games better, and that's them working on their own psychology of staying in games and not being those teams that go, okay, we're in this game, it's 0-0, you're frustrating Chelsea, and now we're just banking up and we're dropping off and we're allowing them lots of time and space to create and hurt us. Like, you know, being able to sort of be a bit more pragmatic at times and go, you know what, we don't need to build now in the 55th minute. Let's just get everybody in and try and win first, second balls higher up the pitch where we got numbers, and threaten more in their half, you know, win corners, win throw-ins in their half. I think that's a side of the game that other teams need to improve on, because everyone is trying to improve on the tactical detail. You see that with every team, their structure, and they want to build out from the back. You know, they want to play through the thirds. They're trying to play in wide areas and get deliveries in the box. But a part of the other side of the game is just to compete, right? It's just to win duels, to actually go, I am going to punish you today. And I don't want you, I use example, say it's Ritin Kanarid. She likes to play high up the pitch. She likes to go 1v1. I'm going to force you into situations where you have to defend against me. Do you know what I mean? Or you have to think about the space you're leaving a bit more. And I don't think the Chelsea players always put under that kind of stress of like, you know, I'm out of position now. I've got to think about the space I'm leaving, or backing up my teammate, or doubling up to defend. So it's a little bit of that pragmatism. I would like to see a bit more combativeness, a bit more physicality, and a bit more of, you know what, we're not going to play the best football always, but when we do get to our quality, let's do it. Liverpool did it against Man United fantastically, right?
Yeah.
Playing a counter-attacking style. So teams can do it. It's the consistency at which they do it with quality and the psychological, end of part of the game as well.
Especially with the top teams. This is the first season I think that Chelsea have done a double over the top 3 teams. So that's not happened in recent years. So what they've shown is actually they have progressed. They've only dropped points to Leicester, surprisingly, and West Ham. So they were 2 surprises in terms of where they did drop points. But they've done the double over all of the top teams around them. And that's something they haven't done in recent seasons. They've drawn or lost games against, the other teams competing with them. But it's about that consistency. And I think, we like the fact that other teams have a style of play, the likes of Arsenal and Manchester City, beautiful to watch at times, right? And Chelsea adapt, and we know sometimes you can watch a Chelsea team and you could be off your seat and excited by how they play, and then there's other times that you can watch Chelsea and it's a boring game and you're sat there thinking, oh, you want something to happen, but you come away from the game and they've won again. So I think that's something that Chelsea do really well. And other teams around them don't do so well. And maybe it's something that they need to adjust, certainly next season. But you're right, it's probably that consistency piece. But let's move on to second and third place, right? Because Manchester City, we knew that Man United had 3 tough remaining fixtures. They lost the first one against Chelsea. They then had a second one, and this was an opportunity for Manchester City to put real pressure on them going into their final game against Arsenal. And Manchester City were 2-0 up. Man United, out of nowhere, gets an equaliser and secures Champions League football for next season, which means it's going to be Chelsea, Arsenal and Manchester United competing for Champions League football next year. But we still have United and Arsenal, final game of the season, competing for second, which we'll talk about because it makes a huge difference in terms of that qualification for the Champions League and kind of the route they go. But in terms of that needs, they've sealed Champions League. What can we say about Mark Skinner?
Well, I don't want to get absolutely hammered by Man United supporters because we know how they feel. But I mean, you can only assess what we're seeing on the pitch and the results and the position they finished in the league. And credit to them, midway through the season, I think we both sort of turned a point and said, no, we think Man United are going to finish in the top 3 and they're unstoppable. They've shown such consistent levels, especially defensively. Man City had too much to do. I think Man United have been in great form. They've had quite a consistent lineup. We said about their defensive record throughout the season, how solid they've been. Fallon Tullis-Joyce has come in and taken over that Mary Earps role exceptionally well. But they're scoring goals as well, and they're getting their creative players back into great form. Signed Bizet. I think she's had a lot of impact for the team, along with Turland, who we know is a threat in the box. And, now you've got young players as well, like Grace Clinton, who are showing what they're made of, which we already knew from her stint at Tottenham. But Toon coming back into form. They had all the right ingredients, I think, coming together in the right moment, and they deserve to be in the position they're in. And now it's going to be really exciting, I think, to see their fixture against Arsenal, especially off the back of the 2 latest results for Arsenal.
In terms of the amount of players that Manchester United let go, or should I say key players that they let go, you will kind of question in the direction that the club will maybe going in. I know we had a few Man United supporters on our podcast last year, and we're talking about a little bit of the disconnect, a little bit of the frustrations between fans and what's going on at the club. But I actually think Mark Skinner's done a fantastic job. And I think he's gone back to real basics in terms of, I remember when they were competing for the title a couple of years ago, and the foundations and the DNA kind of Man United play was that they were hard to beat. Defensively, they had a fantastic record. They pretty much kept their same back 5, so goalkeeper and back 4 throughout the whole season. And they haven't been able to do that as much this year, but pretty much when the players have been fit, you know that back 5. And I think defensively, I mean, the league doesn't lie, and on paper, they still have, I think, the best record in terms of conceded the least amount of goals. So I think going back to that and then being able to build on that has been what I've been impressed by. And the fact that I felt last year watching United at times they would play out and they were risky with their ball, and there was a lot of turnovers in really bad areas for them to then have to defend. This year they're like no nonsense. It's like we'll play when we can, and when we feel we have to manage the game and play a little bit of territory football and get up the pitch. As you mentioned, Tullis Joyce, in terms of her decision making this year with the ball, I think it's been very good. She's not afraid to tell her back line to get up the pitch and go long, and it's been impressive the way that they've done that, because I don't think any of us expected it. They've played good second ball football at times when needed, and as I say, they've also been very good with the ball. And you mentioned key players, I think you're right. Ella Toon, the little break she had, really helped her. She come back real energized, and she's been key to them. I think Grace Clinton finally settling and kind of showing what she did at Tottenham for a whole season. Turlen continued that form she had at Brighton, and has shown why Manchester United signed her, because she's a goal scorer. So they've done they brought in a lot of players or players that maybe there was question marks around, and were they good enough to replace what they had. But overall, I think they've had a fantastic season, and as you said, a lot of that goes down to, in my opinion, Mark.
I think what's interesting is obviously all the off-pitch noise around the club in general, the fans' discontentment with Mark Skinner, but he is getting a tune out of these players. So I don't know, like it can't be, like, I wonder if it's as bad as what everybody thinks in terms of the relationships and dynamics, but they seem to respect him enough to go out there and perform to their best levels. They're into another FA Cup final. They're going to finish, well, potentially in second, matching their best ever finish before. So in one sense, they're progressing despite everything that's going on in the background of the club.
This is their third FA Cup final in a row. So they lost to Chelsea in the first one. They obviously won the second one last season against Tottenham, and they're in it again against Chelsea, and I guess hoping for revenge. But I have been massively impressed. Last season they finished fifth, behind Liverpool on 35 points. So they had a rough season last year, and to be able to bounce back and create the character and togetherness within the team that looked broken at times last year. Credit to, one, the players, because I think the players have to buy into it. Two, Mark Skinner, in terms of what he's done to kind of get that group, and then the staff, that have helped with that. But Neats, you spoke there, second and third. There's a big difference in the women's game in terms of then getting into that Champions League spot. So Chelsea get into the Champions League automatically by finishing top. Second place, they have a home and away fixture to qualify. And then if you finish third, you go into like a group phase to qualify. I think I'm right in saying along those lines, like a group phase to get in. So a lot more difficult. And the teams that finish third, they go into that group phase a little bit earlier than the team that finishes second. Off the back of a European Championship this summer, how important is it for...
Thanks.
We're going to talk about Arsenal straight after. So for Man United first, how important is it that they finish in second ahead of Arsenal? They've got that fixture at the weekend. If they win, they know they finish in second ahead of Arsenal.
Massively important, because they number one, they want to finish as high as they possibly can in the league. Because I think it signals a message, and that's what you want as a team. Secondly, I think, as you said, many players will be going to the Euros this summer for their respective nations, as well as the England players. And, we know how much energy, time, everything that they put in terms of performance and concentration into that competition, to know you're not going to have a massively long break, then go into qualifications in a group phase with multiple games. They're not going to want that. Players aren't going to want it. The management aren't going to want it. They need a rest as much as the players. The players will definitely need a rest. So from that perspective, it's incredibly important. And because of that group stage and when it is played, I think, if I'm correct in saying this, it's towards the sort of pre-season end, or rolling into the start of the season time for us in terms of the WSL. That is not ideal, because you're just trying to build momentum and get off to a good start, but having to go into a competition firing straight away, we know is super challenging when you're trying to get the team back together off the back of a competition as well. Maybe one or two new players might join the team, or young players come up. All of that, I think, is challenging. So both of those teams desperately, I think, want to finish in second for sure.
Yeah, when you go into a summer tournament, as you mentioned, whether you play or you don't, whether it be a physical, energy that you lose or mental energy that you lose throughout that duration, coming away from that, and then, not having a lot of time before you then will have to go back into, domestic football, it will be difficult. So yeah, I think it's massively important. But Arsenal were pretty much a few weeks ago, we thought, second place secured for Arsenal. Unbelievable run under Rene Slager's, only losing to Chelsea, obviously, in the league. Sorry, and Liverpool in the cup, but domestically they in league they lost to Chelsea, they lost to Liverpool in the cup. But apart from that, was scoring, free flowing, playing a beautiful game. Everybody was, raving about Arsenal. They obviously come back twice in the Champions League. They come back and beat from being 2-0 down against Real Madrid in the quarterfinal, come back from that. They're 2-1 down against Lyon, and the giants of European football go away to Lyon, who are unbeaten there in over 2 seasons. Absolutely wiped the floor with them, and now we're rubbing our hands together and we're like, right, we've got the best Champions League final coming up. Barcelona against Arsenal, two ball playing teams, really excited, coming into the final in great form. And then Arsenal, they've lost their last 2 games and conceded 9 goals. Now, they've only conceded, Neats, over the season 23 goals, right? So Chelsea have conceded 13. Before those 2 games, Arsenal conceded 14, and Man United have conceded 12, right? So it was really close in terms of goals conceded. But over those 2 games, they've moved their goals against up to 23. 9 goals conceded against the likes of Brighton and Aston Villa. I mean, what's happened?
Farah, good question. Honestly, it was a shock seeing the results of games over the weekend, and it's diabolical, actually. I'm sorry, because you can't be conceding 9 goals over 2 games, knowing you're going into one of the biggest games of the club's season. I don't even know what to say. Like, I don't know where they went wrong or why it's gone so horribly wrong. I think that obviously there have been a couple of changes to the lineup.
There was in the Aston Villa game, right? So they'd obviously had a tough, week in terms of double header in the Champions League, and they made a few changes against Aston Villa. So you can kind of go, yeah, I understand a little bit, few changes, disconnect, a few mistakes. Obviously, Villa took advantage of that. But against Brighton yesterday, that was their starting 11 that on paper you're going to start against Barcelona in 2 weeks' time in the Champions League final. Okay, maybe not the goalkeeper. I think there's an argument there. And I know that's a huge, at the minute, Domsela not being fit and Zinsberger playing. That would be the only change going into that final. So on paper yesterday, going into that Brighton game, that's their starting 11.
Yeah, no, 100%. With the high of reaching a Champions League final, with the momentum they've created for themselves heading into the latter phases of this season, you would think they go into that game guns blazing, dominant, possessing the ball like they have in every other game. They've played, no disrespect to Brighton, stronger, better teams in Europe. So to fall away the way they did, going into one of the biggest games of their season, it's just not acceptable, is it? Like, as a manager, you've got to be thinking, what is going on, and what is the mentality of the team at the minute, and are we fully focused? Because as far as I'm concerned, when you represent any of those big clubs, and especially at Arsenal, from my experience, you don't want to lose any football matches. Absolutely not. But especially when you're on the run that you have, to finish the season strong is equally as important, whether you win the league or don't. So for me, I think it was disappointing to see those levels from those players with the quality that we know they have. But credit to Brighton, they had a lot of momentum in the game, and Frank Kirby's finish. The finishes are unreal, but a team beating Arsenal at this point in their season has got to be fearing Arsenal. You're going, this is a team that's in a Champions League final, not a team that we're gonna go over and win and dominate against.
Going into a Champions League final, off the back of 2 defeats, there's potentially going to be a tough game, last game of the season next weekend. Then they have a gap. So they have a gap in between that. They've got a 2-week gap. So, they miss one weekend because the Champions League, we know, is on the 24th, and the last league game is on the 10th of May. So they have a gap, and they're probably not going to play another competitive game in that. Maybe an in-house game, but probably not another competitive game. So it's a long gap to go into it with no momentum. And so it's something that for Arsenal against Manchester United in that final fixture, and they're at the Emirates, and we know what happens at the Emirates. They tend to play really well. The fans turn up and they tend to get a result, but they have to turn up because that team that played, as I said, on paper, okay, you could argue Chloe Kelly and Beth Mead who might start, but on paper, that is their strongest 11, in my opinion. And I guess in Renee Slager's, because that's the team she played against Lyon in the 2 fixtures, that is going to win this game or start this game against Barcelona. So, yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to it. I'm hoping that those 2 performances were a case of Arsenal just looking too far ahead to the final and maybe knowing that Champions League football was secure, don't want to get injured and kind of half-heartedly trying to play these games, which we know can happen. There's nothing to play for them other than that final this season. And you know what it's like sometimes, Neats, when there's a cup final, or if you're, tournament at the end of the summer, those last games where there's nothing really in it, we can't win the title. You just don't want to get injured, do you? You want to be able to, be fit and available. So maybe, just maybe, that's the reason why, those 2 defeats were the reason why. But I mean, as I say, I still believe that, because I still believe this team could play and beat Barcelona. I think stylistically they can. I think their styles probably marry up a little bit better than what Chelsea and Barca styles do. I think, I think I mentioned it, like boxing, isn't it? Like, like when you're a boxer and you say styles make a fight or styles don't. For some reason, Chelsea don't seem to be able to find that style that can really compete with Barca. But I do believe that this Arsenal style, similar to what Manchester City did in that group stage, can compete and have the style to kind of, compete and potentially on a one-off game beat this Barcelona team. So I still have my fingers crossed. I'm still very hopeful that Arsenal will be able to go out to out to Lisbon and do a job on Barcelona. But they certainly need to lift the levels of performance in their final game at Manchester United next weekend. But Neats, enough of the WSL. Although Everton did beat Liverpool in the Merseyside derby, we have to mention that. Aston Villa, another win, late win for Aston Villa beating West Ham. But anyway, enough on WSL, because I think most of our eyes, even though we were doing Chelsea-Tottenham at the weekend in the WSL, a lot of the eyes on the women's game was in the Women's Championship. You could call it a playoff game, right? Because the top 2 teams, London City Lionesses, had to go away to Birmingham. There was 2 points in it, so London City were 2 points ahead of Birmingham. Birmingham needed a win. London City Lionesses needed a draw, just a draw, to see them promoted into the WSL. And look, Nick, we had our phone out throughout the game, keeping an eye on that. But London City got the draw, 2-2. They were 2-0 up, and Birmingham did show good fight to try and get themselves back into the game. It finished 2-2. But what can we expect from them next season, Anita? I know that you're super excited by all the investment and everything that's happening at London City at the minute. But what can we expect from them really next season in the WSL? Because we know that the last 2 teams that have come up have gone straight back down.
Yeah, I think for all the championship clubs, firstly, congratulations to London City Lionesses, and a commendable, charge from Birmingham at the end as well. I think they made that league highly competitive and exciting to follow. But as we know, I think the challenge for any championship club is coming up to the WSL and trying to compete directly with all the teams that have, historically been in the top tier, have had more experience and longevity at the top tier of the know-how and what it takes to stay there. The other challenge for them is not just on the pitch in terms of figuring out, can your playing style be effective, the way they want to play, be the same, have the same impact and effect as it has done in the championship in the WSL, or will they have to adapt and change their on-pitch philosophy? They've got an experienced coach in Jocelyn Precheur, who's come in, French manager there, and I think You know, he probably will want them to play an attractive style of football. But ultimately, it comes down to recruitment. Can they recruit, you know, experienced top level players or emerging talents whilst offering, you know, reasonable and good salaries, which is all part of the investment side. As we know, that's the biggest challenge. How do you get those players to a club like London City Lionesses that doesn't have as rich a history as some of the other women's teams in the top tier and across the football pyramid, since they are kind of a new establishment since their breakaway from Millwall and then when they became Millwall Lionesses. But the good news is, as I said on the program, is Michelle Kang, the owner who came in 2023, owns Washington Spirit. She owns Lyon in the top tier of the French league. And you would imagine she understands from the business end how much roughly it would take to be competitive, how much she would need to invest in all areas. And that is from recruiting her staff to the players on the pitch, to the facilities, to everything around the game, you know, so that they can be obviously perform at their best levels. So I'm excited for that because I think she's ambitious, you know, for her to even take a club on like London City, which is essentially an independent establishment compared to the rest of the teams in the league. She brought in, you know, marquee signings into the championship: Aslani, Jakobsen, Kumagai. You know, I think the fact that she brought them in will help her attract other top talent to her team. So I hope that they can come in straight away and be competitive and get us all our tongues wagging, basically.
You're right. I mean, look, they're an independent club, aren't they? They don't have any affiliation with any male, you know, clubs that they kind of sit under. And so for that reason, as you mentioned there, Michelle Kang is able to do things her own way. And, you know, not many other women's teams, you know, certainly not in England, are able to do that. You know, they're very reliant and dependent on what happens, you know, with the men within the club. And it's been difficult, you know, for a period of time for the women's game with that, you know, when the men's team, I mean, I can speak from when I was at Reading, and, you know, when the men's team weren't doing so well and they got relegated, and all of a sudden financially that really impacts the women. And, you know, it happened at a few teams, you know, along the way. We saw how Birmingham, who yesterday were competing with London City Lionesses, you know, the men, as soon as they started to go down the leagues, it really impacted the investment they got. So it's been difficult. I'm excited, and why I'm excited is because I think although the teams that have come up, the likes of Palace and Bristol City, right, when they did come into the WSL, in terms of like name, in terms of like funds and being able to, you know, maybe if there's teams around them. So you think of this season, you know, Crystal Palace come up, and then you've got the likes of Brighton or Leicester, for example, that have been in the league for a couple of years, or West Ham that have been down there a little bit, right? And you've got a team that's newly come up. So the fact that now London City Lionesses have come up, they could probably offer not just a small bit more than some of these teams, but a lot bit, right? a lot more. And so that we already know that little bit extra money or more money than some of these teams around them. And the fact that they already have some, you know, marquee signings from last year. So Aslani, as you mentioned, like, you know, stars in the women's game over the years, they already have names that are coming up as in players. It's more of an attraction. There's a project there.
Yeah.
That's something that Michelle Kang is really, really invested in. And as openly said, look, I'm here to, you know, empower women, invest in this team and really push them on. And she actually mentioned wanting to win the WSL. I can't remember the length of time she's given herself to do that. So I feel like they come up with a bigger advantage than the teams that have come up previous, because financially they'll have a lot more funds, and they've already built, you know, a squad that is strong enough, that have played in the WSL before, players that have played there before. So they'll probably be a bit more ready. They will need to add, because there'll be players in that squad that aren't good enough to compete.
Faz, is that because she is an independent owner, as you say, not affiliated with a men's club, the ability for her to drive commercial value and marketing and sponsorship in the direction that she wants is huge. because a lot of the women's teams are, you know, kind of hamstrung by the conditions or, you know, contracts that the men's club have and engagement or however much engagement they have in terms of driving the women's marketing and all of that. But I think she will bring that to like the London City Lionesses, which is also an additional advantage.
That's something that the Nuco takeover, they kind of wanted. They wanted that little bit of, can we separate ourselves a little bit, get our own, you know, sponsors, etc., or investors into the women's side, as opposed to being overseen by the men. So I think if they are to come up and show that it can be successful, who knows where, you know, what direction maybe the women's game might go in if they, you know, if other teams see that working. But this is just me thinking a little bit too far ahead. But congratulations to London City Lionesses. Really excited for them and to see what, you know, they bring to the league next season. But Neats, I believe you have some questions for us.
Yeah, so our fans' questions this week is from 191219N. who has been your player of the year in the WSL this season? I think it's so hard. Obviously, these are awards that happen all the time, but to give individual accolades in a team sport, I just, you know, sometimes I find really hard because so many players make those players better or give them the opportunities and to score or create. But I think yeah, of course, I would have said in terms of impact, players that impact, you notice when they're not there, you notice when they're on the pitch and how influential they are. Erin Cuthbert, off the pitch, everything about her character persona, you want her in your changing room. And she's demonstrated that consistently for Chelsea, not only this season. Caldente is the other one, because I think when you get midfielders that are not only creative and such intelligent players, but can score as well as assist, you're winning, because then you're not having to rely on like a single source in terms of just attacking forwards or wingers that score goals. That you got midfielders that can chip in and also be Tala's women or Tala's players. And then finally, Caitlin Ford, she's kind of goes under the radar a little bit and doesn't get the plaudits she deserves. And actually, she is one of the toughest players to play against, I would say, at least from my experience. But I would go with Russo. I'd go with Russo just because I think she had a difficult time at the beginning. Probably a lot of expectation on her shoulders coming into Arsenal. A lot of people saying maybe she's not hitting the levels that they expected her to. And now she's showing that all sides of her game, that, you know, how influential she can be, her hold-up play, her ability to get in the box, her ability to run channels and stretch the game. She's kind of an all-rounder for me, but she's adding even more goals to her game now. But yeah, definitely a toss-up. And Sony players obviously have had great seasons.
Yeah, maybe we was a little bit surprised because Bjorn, I think we mentioned, had a good season. We were speaking about, you know, how important, and, you know, is Germa just going to be able to knock her out of her spot because she was playing so well. And I did see after the game on Sunday, actually, she got player of the season. So I think that demonstrates her importance to Chelsea this year. And, you know, and Baltimore, I know that, you know, she's one that we really do, you know, like watching, and also the job she's done in that fullback area, given she come as a left midfielder. So yeah, there's been a lot, and it's so difficult to pick out, you know, individual performances throughout the season. But Neats, we will be doing that next week on our final podcast. We will be picking a WSL 11. We will be picking a goal of the season. We will be picking signing of the season, or in most impactful signing of the season. We will be picking player of the season. So we will have all that next week in our final episode of the WSL, in our Boots, Balls and Bras. But thanks for listening, guys. Make sure you like, comment and subscribe to never miss an episode. And again, never forget, send in topics. I know it's the last one, but if you send in topics, we do have a podcast running over the summer because we have the European Championships. So we will see you next week for our final episode of Boots, Balls and Bras WSL this season.